show where armchair economists rule the roost. We don't claim to be experts about economics or finance, but we sure love talking about it. And anything we can tangentially claim is related to finance or economics is fair game on the show. As always, we'd love to hear from our listeners, so feel free to call in at area code 917-388-4810. And today, we actually, believe it or not, have a bona fide economist as a guest. Steve Keen he's an eminent economist and blogger, no less, from Australia, is here to join us, and I'm excited to have him on the show. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Michael.
Would you like to tell our listeners?
Myself introduced.
Yeah, would you mind telling our listeners?
Sure,
words. Go on.
Okay, actually, when I introduce myself socially, I actually start by saying I'm an anti-economist. Even though I then explain I have a professorship in economics, but I say that I teach that it's what the conventional belief is absolute nonsense and has always been absolute nonsense. And my role is partially trying to develop a realistically, empirically based approach to economics, but also to point out that the conventional theory is absolute garbage. And so it's a funny situation. I'm a bit like Groucho Marx. I wouldn't want to be part of a club that that those guys are part of, but I have to be able to take on their credibility.
Well, it's always been my belief that economists existed to provide justification for what politicians want to do.
If only it was that simple. I think often actually Keynes put it better. Keynes put it better and said that politicians actually basically have no idea of what to do, though when they come up with what they think is an idea, they're normally distilling voice. I think it said like politicians who believe themselves free from influence and are hearing voices in the air are normally distilling the comments of some academic scribbler some years previously, and that's really been the whole nature of how politicians have responded to economists, and it's why the crisis we're in now, A, has been so bad, and B, why the type of responses that Obama and co have been making to try to turn it around haven't worked anywhere near as well as they'd hoped in the first place because they've been following conventional economic advice. So I better explain what I'm saying, that the theory that dominates economics, see, people who don't know economics think there's just economics. In fact, that applies to a lot of economists. When you ask them what economic theory they adhere to, they say, I'm just an economist. If they say that, what they actually mean is they follow a theory of thought called neoclassical economics, which dates back to the 1870s and comes from the work of Jevons, Volras, and Menger in particular, the first two, and then Marshall. And this sees the economy as being a bit like a well-oiled machine where everything settles down to equilibrium, where individual preferences are expressed by consumers, profit-maximizing behavior takes place with firms, and the outcome is a perfectly equilibrated system. And that view of how the economy operates turns a blind eye to the role of money. In fact, says anybody who believes money has any significance is suffering what they call the money illusion. And that view of economics should have, yeah?
Well, before we go a little bit further, I just have to say we have a caller on the line, and this is one of our regular guest panelists. Elliot, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Michael, and it's great to meet you, Steve. I think the quote was, intelligent men who believe themselves free from bias or slaves or inevitably slaves of some defunct economist.
Yes, that's right, yeah. Slaves as a defunct economist, exactly.
Sorry to have interrupted you, Steve.
Well, sure, neither of us here are big fans of the Keynesian school, but I think most people these days, if you take a macroeconomics course in college, that's basically what you're going to be taught.
Well, no, it's not. This is one of the great myths, I'm afraid, to say of conventional economics. And in fact, I can give you a quote. I'm rewriting writing a second edition of my book, Debunking Economics, right now. And to do that, I've got to do much more on macro than I did back in the original version of the book. And I'm currently reading the keynote address to the 2003 History of Political Economy Conference by one Robert E. Lucas. And Lucas, of course, is the main person who gave us rational expectations macroeconomics. Now, one part of what he argues here He says that he's a Keynesian. My credentials, was I a Keynesian myself? Absolutely. And does my Chicago training disqualify me for that? Not at all. And he goes on saying our Keynesian credentials, if we wanted to claim them, were as good as it could be had in any graduate school in the country in 1963. Then slightly further on, he starts talking about the general theory, and he says that I remember Alvin Howson had to write a watered-down version of the general theory. You had to have an intermediary to get you close to the general theory. Someone had to help you get at it, but I had no idea what was actually in Keynes's work, Keynes's book. And then he later on talks about talking with Gary Becker about the state of what you could take as being Keynesian economics. And he's chatting away to Gary Becker and says that he asked Becker whether he thought John Hicks had got the general theory right with his ISLM diagram. That's the ISLM model is the heart and soul of undergraduate education in economics. And this is what Gary Becker had to say. These are two Nobel Prize winners discussing economics with him, by the way. Gary said, well, I don't know, but I hope he did, because if it wasn't for Hicks, I never would have made any sense out of that damn book. And Lucas continues, that's kind of the way I feel too, so I'm hoping Hicks got it right. Now, 20 years before Lucas gave this speech in 2003, John Hicks admitted he got it wrong. He said the ISLM model, which was something he dreamed up, it wasn't a version of Keynes, and he had to admit that when he tried to look what Keynes was actually talking about, the ISLM model itself didn't make sense. Now, that's what people think is a Keynesian education. It's a travesty. What Keynes had to say and what people call Keynesianism are two utterly different things. Boy, I was heavy there, wasn't I?
So what is Keynesianism then? What is it?
It's really... Keynes, one reason this can happen is that Keynes was a bit like a snake, or not a snake, losing a skin, but say an axolotl turning into a salamander, if you know the transformation that can occur there. You start in a particular state, you go for a transformation, you end up in another state, go from amphibian to reptile and so on. Well, Keynes was sort of, when he wrote the general theory, he was halfway through the transformation from being a Marshallian to realizing that Marshall's views of how the economy operates didn't make sense when he took into account the existence of money and the role of money in a world in which the future is uncertain. So the general theory is a mishmash between basic neoclassical ideas that come from Marshall, who was Keynes's lecturer, and a vision of capitalism that sees it as an unstable system driven by finance and credit, and where people will borrow money to speculate about the future, and their speculations will inherently be wrong, and if those speculations lead to an excessive accumulation of debt, you'll have a financial crisis. That is the sort of world that Keynes was moving towards as he wrote the general theory. The person who captured the soul of Keynes best was Hyman Minsky. And the interesting thing is Minsky did a conventional education, had a conventional education in economics in an American graduate school as well. It may well have been Chicago. I know it was actually Schumpeter was his PhD supervisor. Wherever Schumpeter was based is where Minsky did his PhD, his economics degree. But he actually at one stage was, when he's trying to bring in his ideas about financial instability, he referred to making the Keynesian assumption that investment is a function of the interest rate. And then at a later stage, he read Hicks's ISLM model. Then he read a paper that Keynes wrote himself 1 year after Hicks's version of Keynes came out, called The General Theory of Employment, written back in 1937. It's only 15 pages long. Anybody who thinks they've got a Keynesian education, and if they're doing an economics degree anywhere in the world, should read that chapter and then work out whether what they were taught was Keynes was actually anything resembling Keynes. Now, Minsky read that, and his reaction was he couldn't understand how anybody could regard the Hicks's ISLM model as a summary of Keynes, because all the important concepts in that 15-page General Theory of Employment paper from 1937 were completely absent from Hicks's so-called ISLM model summary. So it had incredibly bad pedagogy, has given us the type of economics we currently have, and that's played a major role in the fact that we're now ensconced in the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression.
Well, one of the things I notice when I look at economics, or the field of economics, is that most economists are employed by bureaucracies and governments of some sort or another. And so that would seem to me that economics, the field of economics, would be geared towards theories that want to find solutions and knobs and levers that policymakers can use. And so any kind of theory of economics which says that which might actually think that there aren't levers or that you can't just control things would not be that popular, because I mean, how can you get employed by a?
That makes logical sense, and therefore it's wrong. I just put it that way. But economics, if it was logic, I wouldn't be playing the role that I'm playing in economic commentary today, because that does seem to make sense. You work for your bureaucracy, and therefore you justify whether bureaucracy needs to exist. The crazy thing is economists spend all the time just explaining why the bureaucracy that employs them shouldn't exist at all. It's quite weird. And what I really see it as being, I see them as a religious faction, rather like the mullahs in Iran, rather than being functionaries in a system where you can expect them to behave in the way that the paymaster of the system wants them to. So, for example, in Australia, we have a group called the Industries. It's known as the Productivity Commission. It used to be known as the Industries Assistance Commission, back when its objective was to try to build Australian industry. Its nickname became the Industry Assassination Commission, because it always found reasons not to give assistance to industries. And they really see themselves as the guardians of the fundamental truth that there should be no government sector and everything should be done by the private sector, even though most of them are employed by the public sector. So they find positions of influence and power inside the public sector to argue for its own abolition. I find it quite ironic when I see that happening, but it means you can't interpret their behaviour in the simplistic way that, because their dollars are paid by the public paymaster, therefore they'll be finding reasons to support the public sector. And again, all you have to do is read the literature to see that's not the case. For example, there's one paper that I've been reading through right now, again, as I'm writing this version of Debunking Economics. You have people like Sargent and Rapping, who are two of the main characters who argued for what's called the rational expectations revolution in economics. They argued at one stage that there is absolutely no capacity for the public sector to fool the public, as they said,